Today is, of course, November 7th. It is exactly a month since thousands of Hamas terrorists infiltrated southern Israel, raping, torturing and murdering men, women and children. At least 1,400 people were killed and 240 taken hostage. Their families enduring agony for 32 days now, not knowing what has happened to their loved ones. Well, across the country, Israelis held a moment of silence today to remember the victims. The IDF says at least 34 soldiers have been killed in combat since October 7th. IDF troops continue to push further into Gaza, taking control of a major Hamas outpost overnight. And there have been ongoing skirmishes in the north as well between IDF forces and fighters from the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah. Residents were asked to stay near a safe room earlier amid an unspecified security threat, and there have been large barrages of rockets fired from Lebanon towards Israel over the past 48 hours, I should say, sorry. Let's go to northern Israel now to get the very latest on the situation there. Our correspondent, Mary McAuliffe, is with us. Mary, first of all, the US envoy, Amos Hochstein, has arrived in Beirut. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. So reports from inside Lebanon that Amos Hochstein has just arrived in the area. He's due to meet in Beirut with both the Prime Minister of Lebanon and also the President. It's all part of the U.S. efforts to try and de-escalate the situation in the Middle East. We know the U.S. has been working around the clock to try and make sure that this does not spiral into a situation out of control. In the meantime, in the background of all the diplomatic efforts, they're also taking a number of different military and defensive steps to also position forces in the region, but they're hoping this doesn't become necessary. So we see Amos Hochstein, and he's been on the ground numerous times over the past few years as a Biden special envoy really for Israel-Lebanon crisis. He was heavily involved in the maritime border talks and that dispute between Israel and Lebanon. So him being here on the ground is just yet another sign that the U.S. is heavily trying to work to make sure that this does not spiral into a situation that's out of control, and sees the need to bring in the U.S. military presence that has been on the ground here. So they will be involved in talks in Lebanon today.
And in terms of the ongoing clashes, the ongoing skirmishes, if you like, between Hezbollah and the IDF, Israel intercepted a suspicious aerial target earlier today. What happened?
That's right. We don't have many details on what that suspicious aerial target was. Normally, they would just say an unmanned aerial aircraft, which obviously would mean a drone. We know that Hezbollah has been launching drones across the border. This has happened a few times since October 8th when Hezbollah first got involved in this fighting. The IDF said that it responded not just to take down that suspicious object, but also attacking the source of where they said this launch came from. Just within recent minutes, we once again had rocket sirens here in the north. This is now the third day in a row that there have been double-digit rockets fired into northern Israeli communities. We don't have any reports of injuries from that, but the IDF said that there were 20 rockets were seen crossing over from inside southern Lebanon into Israeli territories. Of course, we should remember that most of the communities here within 4 kilometers of the border, they have all been evacuated for weeks now as Israel continues to fear attacks coming from inside southern Lebanon, not just at their observation posts and their military infrastructure, which is the majority of attacks that we've seen in recent weeks, but in recent days stepping up those attacks, and we've seen even more rockets fired at Israeli communities. One Israeli has died over the course of this past week. So certainly in terms of the threats on civilian casualties, it is certainly still IDF still warning there is a threat, telling all residents to evacuate. If your community has been told to evacuate, to please go to safer parts of the country. For many residents, that's difficult as we continue to see rockets everywhere throughout the country. But here on this border, the fear is also from these anti-tank missiles, which have a range of up to 5 kilometers. And we have repeatedly seen Hezbollah throwing these missiles across the border, again, not just at Israeli military, but also at civilian areas where residents and families are also living.
All right, Mary, thank you very much. Mary McAuliffe there is in the north of Israel with the very latest on the skirmishes there. Let me introduce to you my guest this hour, retired Colonel Richard Kemp. Is the former commander of the British forces in Afghanistan. Thank you very much for being with us, Richard. Let's talk first of all then about the situation in the north. I've been speaking to various analysts about whether or not Israel should react more strongly to what's coming at it from Lebanon, because of course Israel is embroiled in the conflict in the south right now, but can it really tolerate these ongoing clashes over its northern border?
Well, of course, Israel is responding when attacks take place from the north. And clearly there's a judgment being made about how strong that response needs to be in the current situation. I think Israel has the capability of responding much more strongly if it needs to. But perhaps the judgment is that they want to maintain the military focus in Gaza at the moment and holding ground in the north. I believe that ultimately, there's whatever Hezbollah ends up doing in terms of a more significant form of aggression, I think Israel's going to have to deal with that situation in southern Lebanon at some point, whether it's while the war's going on in Gaza or whether once that's finished, it has to take decisive action against southern Lebanon.
And Israel does have a little bit of pressure on it from the United States. They have said they don't want an escalation.
Yeah, they have, and of course, the nature of things, Israel's not obliged to do what the US says, but it does have to take into account. It has to listen to what America says, and I think what's really important is that Israel maintains the support of the US in its operations in Gaza and doesn't attract any US pressure to either cease operations or to reduce its scale of operations in Gaza. I think that's most important, and if the trade-off for that is to conduct a holding action in Gaza, then that's probably the right thing to do. I beg your pardon, in Lebanon, that's the right thing to do.
Let's talk about what's happening in Gaza then, because the IDF, night by night has been moving steadily into Gaza City. It encircled the city. We're now hearing reports of gun battles, tunnels being destroyed, and most importantly of all, intelligence being seized, intelligence about their weapons capabilities and also where the hostages might be. Just in terms of your experience, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, the IDF clearly made a plan for its operations based on some pretty good intelligence before they went in. But that plan will change according to a few things, one of which is the development on the ground, the level of resistance, the dispositions of Hamas on the ground and the other terrorists, but also intelligence they gain during the course of operations, which might direct them towards doing other activities. So I think it's a military campaign on the ground in particular is not a kind of fixed plan which has to be maintained. It can be and should be deviated from when necessary. But I think they're going to have to, at some point, very clearly, they're going to have to carry out attacks against the hospitals in Gaza, which are known to be Hamas command and control points, the location of key commanders. They're going to have to be taken on at some point. There will be international criticism, of course, of that, but it's something Israel has no choice in doing, in my view.
And why they're pushing so hard for civilians to leave. Well, let's take a listen to, this is Major General Yaron Finkelman. He's the Commander-in-Chief of the IDF Southern Command. Let's take a listen.
For the first time in decades, the IDF is fighting in the heart of Gaza City, in the heart of terror. It is a complex and difficult war, and unfortunately, it also has taken a toll. We're continuing with all our might, with the goal of defeating the despicable Hamas group. We are getting our fighting spirit from the strength of the nation of Israel. We won't rest. We won't stop until we fulfill our mission, until victory.
All right, so there we see just how intense the situation is getting in Gaza City, and this is completely different to what we've seen in previous years when Israel and Hamas have fought a kind of almost sterile war, wasn't it, with precision strikes on commanders' apartments and things like that. But this is completely different kettle of fish, isn't it?
Yeah, this is all-out intensive conflict. Last time, I think 2014, the IDF went in to a certain degree into Gaza with the specific intent of destroying the attack tunnels that were running under the border into Israel. This time, it's pretty much everything, and focus obviously in the north, hand-to-hand fighting in the most difficult environment it's possible to fight in, which is urban environment, plus of course the tunnels.
Plus the hostages.
The hostages make it. The hostages are obviously a very, very key objective for the IDF, and they make it that much more difficult. I think if the IDF were doing this without those hostages, they probably would not need to enter very many of the tunnels. They could destroy them using explosive devices from the ground and from the air. But this time, I think they're going to have to probably enter the tunnels, and gaining intelligence on the locations of the hostages as they go along is critical to that. So it is going to be a tough fight. And once the heart of Hamas has been destroyed in Gaza City, then they're going to have to start looking south as well. So the operation's not over once they've destroyed Hamas inside Gaza City itself.
What about the objective to destroy Hamas completely? Of course, you were involved in the campaign in Afghanistan. The Taliban still exists today. It still rules over Afghanistan. I mean, can it be any different? Can you ever completely destroy an organisation like that?
I think it's a very different situation, and for a couple of reasons. One, because Gaza is a tiny area, and the terrorists are not absolutely stuck inside Gaza, but there's not very many places for them to go. So they can be pinned down and they can be destroyed in their entirety. Obviously, it's not necessarily going to be. It's going to be very difficult. But in the case of Afghanistan, it was a huge expanse of terrain, and also they had places to go to escape to, like Pakistan and Iran, and then live to fight another day. That doesn't really apply so much in Gaza.
And I guess the troops going into Afghanistan didn't know the terrain like the Israeli forces know the terrain here.
Not just you're right, the terrain, but also the terrorists. They know a great deal, much more about the terrorists in Gaza than we ever knew about the terrorists.
Didn't have the same level of intelligence, for example.
Nothing like. I mean, Israel, despite the intelligence failures of the 7th of October, Israel still has probably the best intelligence on the terrorists in Gaza of any military organisation that's ever fought any conflict.